Hold the Line with Mike Solon is brought to you by the Seattle Police Officers Guild, Seattle's public safety voice.
Hey, welcome back to Hold the Line with Mike Solon. Today I got a special guest in studio. This man I have great respect for. He is an author of a book that, to me, really teaches the public about public safety and policing and the politics entwined within that topic. It's called Justified Deadly Force and the Myth of Systemic Racism. Mike Simonelli is here from Suffolk County, New York. He's going to get into certain aspects of the book, what its overall mission is, why he did it, and why it's critically important for people across this nation, and I think internationally, to understand how politics has overwhelmed policing with the public safety conversation. Buckle up. Let's get it going.
The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther. This is where we hold them. This is where we fight.
We will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish. Not a fight. Hold the line!
Hey, man. Welcome.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you taking the time. I met you a few years ago, and then I learned about your book, and I've gone through it. And to me, it moves the needle to not just educate myself, who's a union head, but
right.
There's some nuances and I think common sense statistics that everybody in this nation that is concerned about public safety should educate themselves on.
Right.
So they're informed. So when they go to the dinner parties or they go to their family reunions, they're armed with good information to push back against some of this nonsense. And you reference it as the myth of systemic racism in terms of the policing profession.
Yes.
So if you don't mind, I know you're a pretty humble guy, but I'm just going to get into your background. I'm just ripping this right directly from the book's website. So it's about the author. Mike Simonelli has a combined 50 years of decorated and honorable service to the nation. Thank you for your service, by the way.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And the and the state of New York. From 1989 to 2019, Mike served in the U.S. military. Graduated from the U.S. Air Force Academy. Pretty tough to do, pretty tough to get into.
Yeah.
With a Bachelor of Science, is that correct?
Yes, everybody graduates with a Bachelor of Science from there.
Okay, Mike was an active duty Air Force finance officer for 5 years. And I thought this was pretty interesting as well, before you transferred to the U.S. Army National Guard and then the reserves. We'll get into that a little bit too. You did that, and you worked as a Civil Affairs Special Operations Army officer, and then you deployed to Iraq from 2003 to 2004, and then to Afghanistan for the surge of 2010. And then you retired as a lieutenant colonel, and your awards include the Brown Star Medal and One Oak Leaf Cluster, Army Combat Action Badge, and an Air Force Combat Action Medal. From 2000 to 21, you served as an active law enforcement officer assigned to patrol operations, highway patrol, community-oriented police enforcement, and then obviously I referenced you as the PBA, which is the Police Benevolent Association. So basically you're part of the union that represents cops for Suffolk County.
Exactly.
Okay. He received numerous awards and 3 times was overwhelmingly voted by his fellow officers to be on their PBA board, the E-board specifically. So that means the coppers that work in your department respect you and elect you to be in that position, to advocate for them, which I think is cool. And then you earned your MA in National Security Studies from American Military University in 2020. So, man, you're a pretty accomplished fella. And I always find it interesting that cops, as busy as we are, you found the time to put something together, which is this book that, folks, I can't really describe it in great detail until Mike does, but this thing, it's incredible. I highly recommend you read it. And it breaks down a lot of the nuances, the politics that have absorbed, or I would say invaded the public safety conversation on policing.
100%.
You break down the methodology of why that occurred, and then you get into the media spin on this and their actions and how detrimental they were to everyone's public safety by pushing myths false narratives,
Exactly.
which has destroyed
Yep.
the public safety across this nation. So, hey, man, welcome. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's been great working with you. I think the past couple of years has been with the United Coalition of Public Safety.
That's right, UCOPS, which is our national group that combines a lot of big city and small department unions and associations to get on the same page to put forth positive messaging and enact change across the nation to the profession, but also start impacting DC. Maybe we can get into some bills that can improve everyone's public safety across the nation. So,
Yes, it's exactly what our profession needs and what the public needs, because the only people, the loudest people out there are the radicals for the most part. When you see who's knocking on doors, who's calling their officials, who's getting articles to the press, it's people that are typically activists. And activists are typically these days anti-police. I mean, they could be for other things, but you don't see a group of pro-police citizens knocking on doors, calling their officials, demanding action for the betterment of the police officers, for their safety, for public safety. So you have it on the anti. So it's good that we have this finally, an organization looking to get police organizations together across the country to push the national dialogue in a positive manner on law enforcement.
Yeah, I think you just nailed it right there. The activists, they're dedicated people.
They are.
And they believe in their cause, but in our view, their actions are so horrible for our profession. And I think that action, that activism,
Right.
impacts and erodes everybody's public safety.
Yes.
And you break that down in your book, man. One of the things I thought was really cool, and I was looking at your preface here and going through your book. Folks, I can tell you this is fantastic, but this is ripped right in the beginning. It's like, this book cannot teach someone to have the courage to stand up for the truth, but it will provide the tools for those who are brave enough to educate themselves, their loved ones, and repudiate those blinded by the false god of racism. In the following pages, you will see how the grievance about fatal police encounters constantly spread in the news, on political pulpits, and by protests is pure deception. This book will provide the facts behind the encounters to demonstrate how race was completely irrelevant. You'll observe how the media spins stories of police shootings depending upon the race of the subjects involved. In addition, this book will also show you how little the media, activists, and even some politicians care about anyone other than blacks killed by the police. Besides whites, Latinos, and Asians, their indifference includes police officers feloniously killed in the line of duty. And then lastly, by the end, this book will prove how in this new religion of wokeness, where the police are made to be the devil, the more appropriate quote for our time is, this really got it good for me. The greatest trick the left ever pulled was convincing America every police encounter with blacks is based upon racism. Is that your quote?
That's me. Yeah.
That is fantastic, man.
Thank
It gives
you.
me chills because I think it's true.
100% it is, sadly. But like you said it in your opening, you referenced how this was a great reference for you, even though you're a PBA president, that there was things that you weren't aware of.
Yeah.
Well, same here. And I'm like the epicenter of a lot of police events that do get media attention in a negative way. So going to my history, I grew up in Brooklyn, I'm a city boy. Started out after I got out of the military, went to the NYPD, and then within 6 months got hired, went out east to Suffolk County. But as events have happened during my tenure as a cop in the news, it got to the point where I was working on my master's degree and I had to write a thesis. And I genuinely was curious of how often do the police really kill black people in shootings? Is it, what percentage is it? Because as you'll see in the book, 100% of the reporting is of black subjects killed by the police. So even though we're both police officers and we see what goes on in our department, when all we're seeing from the media on deadly use of force is when a subject is black, it kind of skews your perception to the point that you even question your own profession. Like, are we really doing this?
Yeah, like why am I in this profession if everybody, what it appears to be that everybody's painted as being racist, that they were born and raised to be racist, and then you get into a profession to then continue to oppress people.
Yeah.
I mean, that is smacks in the, not only just to you as an individual,
Yep.
but then the people in your lineage.
Yeah. And you think about, you know why. There's like 3 reasons people become police officers: to help good people, to lock up bad people, and to protect those people that can't protect themselves from others.
100%.
That's it. There's no race involved in any of that. It's good and bad. Simple.
Yeah. And most of the, at least my knowledge, I can only speak to my knowledge, is that the background to become a police officer, the investigation is pretty robust.
Yes.
I mean, they go through everything. They call references and they go back to your childhood. They delve deep, and then to the point where you gotta take a polygraph, at least in Washington State, to become a cop, and that's nuanced and it's scientific.
We do as well.
Yeah, so it's like at some point, if you portray any ounce of having some type of bias component that you were raised with or that you grew to gravitate towards, then you're going to get bounced.
Right. And rightly so, because we don't want people that are biased.
Yeah, and also then I'll shut up here in just a second, but also you just said it. We don't want to work with people that are biased because it's a profession.
Exactly.
I don't want to work around somebody that's going to tune somebody up or take somebody to jail on false charges. They're violating the Constitution, therefore that paints me as a bad person.
You're trying to do the right thing.
Trying to do the right thing. So, why'd you write the book? More importantly, you kind of get into it a little bit, but I mean, the level of detail you go into here takes a mountain of time. How the hell, with your master's degree and all the stuff I just read off in your bio, how did you find the time to do this? How did you dedicate the time? And then go through also some of the pitfalls, the outcomes after this thing was launched, how that impacted you and your career.
Okay. Actually, I was writing the book before I even knew I was writing the book. See, when I was working on my master's degree in national security, being a military guy, having some overseas time, I was really interested in resurging Russia or China emerging, becoming a great power, or even something like a EMP taking down the grid.
Yeah.
But I knew from just being a cop, a New Yorker, an American, a consumer of the news, the greatest way to destroy America, or the greatest threat to America, was from within, by destroying us within, taking apart the cohesion so we're not united. And the way that I saw that was being done as a consumer of the news was through the police painting us as racist and just bringing hyper attention to incidents that involve black subjects.
So you mean the media painting police as the racist, as the problem, right?
Exactly.
Okay,
Yes.
got it.
Media portraying us as racist, and then politicians and activists, or activists driving that train, politicians jumping on it, and the media just overwhelming. Like you'll see in the book when I talk about different incidents, how many media stories were with one where it was a black subject, and how little when it was a white subject, when kind of similar circumstances.
So maybe their intention too was not just to try to remove community trust from policing, right? You divide us
definitely doing
on that front.
Yes.
But then you use the racial aspect of it to make it more palpable, to drive that division even further, right?
Right. That's America's original sin. We always hear about it,
right.
Slavery. So even though we're now 150 years post-Civil War, 50 years post the Civil Rights Act, even in New York City, Seattle, in the North, we're all being treated as if we're in 1800s Alabama or Georgia. Like
right.
Nothing has ever changed.
The profession is.
The profession, absolutely.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Like we're still slave catchers. They try to say how we originated from slavery, which is so far from the truth. Especially when in New York City, I think in Georgia, you have minority police departments. So just think how ridiculous this perception or this myth that they're pushing is, that policing is a racist profession. You're all a bunch of white supremacists. Oh yeah, even though you're a black officer, you're still perpetuating the white supremacy. So this is what is being pushed. And it's also come about, if you look at what our enemies do, Russia bought, I think, 3,500 Facebook ads for the 2016 election, and half of those were based on race, and half of that, so 25%, were on criminal justice and race, trying to put that narrative out there.
So was it basically a military psyops, if you will?
Exactly.
To divide us as a society.
Right.
Using what you just brought up.
Right.
The racial component.
Right.
And the criminal justice conversations.
Right.
To divide us even further.
Yes. If you don't have criminal justice system that is respected and entrusted by the populace, well, then you lose society. You don't have society. You have anarchy. And people will take matters into their own hands, as we are seeing sometimes recently. So thinking that, believing that, from what I've seen, I thought the most important, the biggest threat being to our national security is what's being perpetuated, the lie about the police. I wanted to do my master's thesis on that. So I very simply had the hypothesis that deadly force incidents involving black people will get more media attention than deadly force incidents involving other races. And those incidents will be portrayed as racist. Broke it down to about 8 sub-hypotheses, as you see in the book, but ultimately those are the 2 hypotheses. And then to prove them or disprove them, I wanted to do analytically and qualitatively and quantitatively. So quantitatively, what I did was I went to the press media. The paper media.
Printed press.
Printed press, exactly. Yeah. USA Today, it's the largest national distribution of any newspaper.
It's a monster paper.
Exactly. Every hotel you go to, USA Today. So I figured, all right, that would be the best one to use. So what I did, and it was painstaking, I went through the front page of every single USA Today from 2015 to 2018, looking at the front page stories and the teasers. They have a couple lines.
Yeah, so the headlines, basically. The headlines are the attention grabbers, and they want people's attention.
Yes.
And we know that we're very limited focus in terms of humans.
Exactly.
And so the headlines are written in a sensationalist manner.
They sure are.
And they don't bet on people actually reading the article. But they'll spin the article after that big headline.
Right.
To push what the headline is actually saying.
Right. And if something grabs your attention, it's going to be from that front page, and you're going to go learn more about that.
That's right.
And so what I found, and this is where I'll bring in the Washington Post database. That is the premier reference of activists to portray the police as being racist, because that database shows every single deadly police shooting. And so from 2015 to 2018, there were 3,668 deadly police shootings. Of those, 1,880 of the subjects were white. So that's 50% of the subjects were white. And 948 were black, about 25%. So the cry from the left has long been, or from the activists that are against the police, however you want to label them, the police are systemically racist and killing black people at a disproportionate rate because they're only 13% of the population, right, but they're 26% of those killed by the police. So then
therefore that should indicate that we've got a problem in the profession because they're targeting, police are targeting blacks.
Exactly. So knowing those numbers, I looked at USA Today's stories on deadly police shootings. They ran 82 different stories naming 57 black individuals killed during those 4 years by the police, a total of 132 times. And in one of those stories, they mentioned one white person killed by the police one time. So that is about 132 to 1. So think about that. 100% of their stories in deadly police shootings were of black people, whereas blacks are only 13% of the population.
So then, I love how you break down the media thing, because I'm not trying to make this about me, but one of the reasons why I started this podcast was, and one of the reasons why I ran for the union president was, hey, meaning the profession needs to drive the narrative, because right. Just like you, I was seeing an overwhelming media spin about the profession that I love and that I dedicated my life to. And so credit to you for just taking this and throwing shade at it. But you really break down with a study from the USA Today that captures all the statistics based upon the hard work you put in for 3 years, proving their myths and false narratives. So then you got to ask yourself, why? Why would the media do this? What's the end game? What's the mission? Were you able to answer that question at all, or kind of in your research, were you trying to figure out why does the media do this, or is it just because sensationalized headlines sell and maybe they're for a dollar amount, or is there something more nefarious in terms of dividing the nation?
I think, now listen, this is personal opinion because I can't get into the heads of the press.
Right.
But if you look at other police-related shootings that I came across, if you were trying to get the sensationalism or outrage, I found other ones that were far more outrageous, even involving a black person shot in the police car after he was in custody, handcuffed and seatbelt. But because the officer shooting him was black, you don't hear anything about it.
Wow.
Right. Imagine if it was a white police officer who took this person into custody, who did not resist at all, seated in the police car, and executed him.
Wow. So that would have been more profound.
Huge. Yes. No comparison to the other incidents that we did hear about, like Michael Brown fighting against the cop breaking the orbital eye of Darren Wilson, or Alton Scott in Baton Rouge, Philando Castile having the gun. Even people like Tatiana Jefferson or Breonna Taylor, there was things in those that make you say, well, there's a reason why the officers used deadly force. Breonna Taylor, they just got shot at, and one officer got shot. Tatiana Jefferson, the officer was going to the backyard thinking there was a burglary in progress based on the call and what him and his partner observed. And when he shined the flashlight on the back of the window, there she was, a legal gun owner, rightfully holding the gun because she thought that she was about to be burglarized. Didn't realize it was the police. But in that instant of the officer just seeing the gun, it's live or die in his eyes. He thought he was about to get shot. He fired a shot, and sadly she was killed. Mm-hmm. But he's been prosecuted.
Yeah, he's doing time.
Yeah,
time.
Exactly. Now, how is it not more outrageous that a guy was sitting in a police car, cuffed, seatbelted in, and shot because he was black and the officer was black?
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to.
Okay, so on average, based upon just going through some numbers in the book, for the 3 years that you referenced, 2015 to 2018, it's roughly about 1,000 police shootings a year.
Yes, in a typical year, there's about 1,000 police shootings. 95% of those people shot are armed with a gun, a knife.
95%. So what would the other 5%?
The other 5% are fighting with the officer, trying to get their gun, trying to run the officer over, or sadly in some cases, suicide by cop.
Yeah, where they intentionally want the police to pull the trigger.
Because they want the police to believe they have a weapon, so they're making those furtive movements as if they do, but they don't have one. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So you used USA Today. Now, did you also use visual media in terms of CNN, ABC, major, what they call, legacy media, right. Alphabet media?
Yes. Yeah, so then I went to a second test. I took 4 subjects that were killed by the police that were black. I took 4 that were white. And then I took 4 police officers killed in the line of duty. And then I examined the number of stories by the Alphabet Media, each one of them. And then I made a spreadsheet showing. But the thing is, I didn't do it completely scientifically honest, per se. I didn't do apples against apples. I took, of the 4 black subjects, 3 of them had firearms. And 1 was killed by an accidental discharge by a rookie police officer.
So a tragic mistake.
Exactly.
First of all, I do want to just put something out there I should have done earlier. Any death at the hands of police and vice versa at the hands of suspects against the police, they're all tragic. And so I just want to make sure that we're on the same page with everybody viewing this podcast, is that every police death is tragic. And the last thing we want to do as coppers is take a human life.
100%. Same thing goes with racism. Vehemently against it. We have no tolerance for it. I could say as somebody who volunteered to go fight against Saddam Hussein and help the Kurds, because he was a ruthless murderer. If I was back in the day, I would 100% fought against the South to end slavery. So, full stop, no buts or anything.
Got it. So then you used Alphabet Media in your second comparison that you referenced 4 cases. So
yes.
You want to delve into that a little bit?
Yeah. So as I told you, the 4 black subjects I picked, the 4 white subjects I picked were not armed at all. No firearms, no weapons. And then the 4 police officers killed in the line of duty. So which group do you think would have the most press about them?
The ones that are unarmed.
Or even the police officers killed in the line of duty.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Well, the ones who got the most press were the black subjects killed by the police. Even to the point that, like, the officers that I picked wasn't just some random, I mean, one was Mia Sotis Familia, who was a single mother of 3 NYPD officer who on July 5th, 2017, as she was sitting in the mobile command post after doing a midnight tour on the 4th of July so she could spend the day with her kids, a perp who was a career criminal out on a robbery parole, I think, just went up to her vehicle and shot her because of the uniform she was wearing.
Just executed.
First female NYPD officer killed in the line of duty since 9/11. She only got 76 stories. 76 stories by those 6 legacy networks. In comparison, Alton Sterling, who the year before had fought with Baton Rouge police officers over the gun he had in his pocket that he was trying to get, that they were called to the store because he had just harassed or menaced a man with a gun, prompting that guy to call 911. He got 1,159 stories.
1,159.
Yeah. Is that 11 or 12 times more stories than she got? It's outrageous.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And then you could go another officer that was killed, Corporal Montrell Jackson. He was murdered the year before in 2016. And this is another reason a main reason that I did write the book. Our profession, we're being labeled as racist killers and we're being killed for it as revenge. So our lives depend upon it, but we don't fight against this war of words as if our lives do depend on it, the way like we'll go into buildings and put our lives on the line. That's right. In many other ways. But
because I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's because we're not trained that way, right? We're trained to protect people physically.
Right.
And then obviously protect each other in the course of that duty.
Right.
But we're willing to give up our lives for that. But what we're not willing to give up is our lives being in jeopardy because of falsehoods and myths. And that's perpetuated by activists and the media class that push their activist agenda.
Right.
So for me, it's like one of the reasons why, podcasts are popping up for police. We have to get into that arena. But the problem is we're outspent 100 to 1.
Right.
And that's not even touching the scale. But the issue is that books like yours, to me, give people the information that allows us to see what the media is trying to push.
Yeah.
There's an agenda there. But then once we know the truth, which your book highlights it based upon your study, to me, that moves the needle. And I think, helps our profession and helps public safety greatly, man.
Yeah. And that's what we need. Because, we're not trained to fight this battle. So I wanted to give our fellow officers a tool to help them, or also for their family, loved ones, or people that support the police that they could use. Because when you're fighting the keyboard warriors, and this is kind of how it started. After the George Floyd incident, I had just finished my thesis. So my thesis was approved in May of 2020. So January through April of 2020, I did all this research. I proved that the bias is by the media, by the press, the protesters, and the politicians, not the police. The next month, George Floyd happened, and the world explodes against the police. So I'm online trying to take parts of my thesis and educate people.
Very difficult hill to climb.
Not happening.
Right.
Total ignorance. You get caught in back and forths where it just seems like you're talking to a wall. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to make a book that you could just throw the book as a reference and say, here's all the facts. Go check it out yourself and then get back to me and not waste my time. And it's something that you could throw to politicians, to anybody out there pushing the false narrative. You say, look at this book. This dispels everything that you're trying to tell us.
Yeah. So for me, it's this book is incredibly impactful because it will arm people with the information they would need to push against the false narrative. So now it's not just police speaking up on behalf of our profession, because we're watching our brothers and sisters die because of this false narrative. But every one of you that's out there, like, you could be a reasonable activist. That's what I refer to people as, using the information in this book to push back against the unreasonable activism that's, at the end of the day, really hindering your quality of life and making crime explode across this nation. Because I think what we're seeing is the outcomes of pushing false narratives vilifying the police. We've got major recruiting shortages across the nation. Crime is out of control.
Yes.
And our nation is somewhat on the precipice of dysfunction.
Truly is.
Not to be hyperbolic,
No.
or come across as hyperbolic, but
Right.
once you remove community trust from the police and you remove our ability to do our jobs effectively, standing up and protecting the Constitution,
Right.
then we're we have some real problems.
We do. So let me, just for your audience, I'll give a quick rundown of the numbers.
Perfect, man.
And then I'm going to get to what some of those effects are that we've seen. So the amount of stories for those 4 black individuals for those 6 networks was 3,094. For the 4 white subjects was 456. So that is, I think, 6 times greater of the armed black individuals and the one tragic ricochet than 4 unarmed people. And then police officers, 622. So even them, they got a fifth of the coverage that people like Alton Sterling received. But bringing it to the effects that we're seeing now, these people that are attacking us under the guise of racism because they're concerned about black people being killed, the how fake and false that is, and the results of trying to diminish law enforcement. Giffords Law Center they did some research. In 2021, there were more black men from ages, I think it was 18 to 24, killed from black on black shootings than accidents, police shootings, COVID, anemia, every heart problems, blood problems, every single thing you can think of combined. That was the single greatest killer of them. So it's not the police. It never has been. And that was also what I showed in my USA Today study of those the front page teasers. They always say that there's so much more stories about black on black crime because you're just trying to push that narrative. Well, in those 4 years, there was about 10,250 black on black murders. Those front page stories, there was only 24 stories mentioning, I think, 14 of those black individuals killed in black on black crime.
14 only.
That's it, 14 out of over 10,000. And there was also 24 stories on officers killed in the line of duty, mentioning 27 of ours. When you had about, in 4 years, roughly 200 officers killed. So you have over 150 officers whose name's not even mentioned ever on the front page. So they get nothing.
That's incredible.
It is incredible. But you saw it here in Seattle with the chop zone. I think you had nine shootings or 5 shootings within 9 days and 2 teenagers killed.
Black teenagers.
How many people you think across America outside of Seattle
Knew about that.
ever heard of Antonio Mays Jr.?
Nobody.
No. Even I was sickened when I read the details that in the chop zone, you have armed criminals making an illegal checkpoint, cordon off a 6-block area. And Antonio Mays Jr. was just driving to get into that area, and his vehicle was riddled with 300 bullets. That's incredible. Yeah. We're not talking about 1998 Somalia or 2012 Iraq or 2020 Venezuela.
2020.
America.
In a major U.S. city where police weren't allowed in a 6-block radius.
Right.
And then so what you see is anarchy.
Right.
And then you really see victims of violent crime. And it turns out that it impacted minorities in that area.
So those are all numbers. So now you've heard the saying, the power of a single story.
Yeah.
So what I did was I made 2 case studies. I didn't do just one because people would say, oh, that's just one example. That's all you have. So I showed 2 case studies showing the comparison of the coverage, not just the numbers, but what was written or not written about a deadly police shooting of a black person versus a white person.
Could you describe for the layman, what is it? Because you're highly educated here and you've got the acumen for it. You've got your master's and all that, and I went through your bio. But for the viewer, what is a case study and what is its purpose?
Case study, it shows you the who, what, where, why, how, basically, of an incident. So you can try to compare something as much on the same factors as possible. Take 2 incidents and you compare them to each other.
Okay. And then so you brought these 2 studies together. Part 1 and part 2 are laid out in the book pretty well. And you also have a part 3. right? In terms of
Part 3 was the legacy, carrying on, paying tribute to all officers killed in the line of duty, and showing how very similar the circumstances are where they are killed in the line of duty compared to when they have to use justified deadly force.
Love it. Okay, so break down part 1 again for us. So get into the book in terms of, those two pieces.
So the case studies, what I compared was Michael Brown versus Justine Damon. Have you heard of Justine Damon?
Never heard of Justine Damon until I read it in your book.
Right, which is pretty wild when you consider what happened. So she was a woman in Minneapolis who heard screams outside of her house in an alley, called 911, thinking a woman was being raped or something. After the second call, she sees a sector car arrive. It's lit.
Which means a police car,
Police car, yes. She walks out in her pajamas to go talk to the cops, let them know what she heard. And she's so startled, police officer Mohammed Noor, who was seated in the passenger seat.
Brand new officer for Minneapolis PD.
Right, who came on with a lot of fanfare as, I believe, the first Somali American police officer. So he was already kind of a superstar in his area. Well, he was so startled by her that he shot across his partner, who was sitting in the driver's side, hit her in the stomach, and she ended up dying.
Incredible.
Right.
Tragic.
So you think of the media attention that she got, it was a fraction compared to Michael Brown's. Michael Brown assaulted a police officer who was in his vehicle, breaking his orbital bone. Then he struggled with him in the vehicle, trying to take the officer's gun. Darren Wilson shot him in the thumb, which is then what caused Mike Brown to take off running. So now, having been shot and having assaulted the officer had to take off after him.
Sure.
And as he did, all of a sudden, unexpectedly, for who knows for what reason, Michael Brown stopped, turned, and charged back at Officer Wilson. And Mike Brown was approximately 6'4", 6'5", 300 pounds.
But then if you remember the media coverage, and I think you used that study or that case just for a great example, the media coverage portrayed Michael, that he was this, and a real smaller picture, right? Younger picture, I should say, not smaller, but younger picture.
Yeah, I think they showed a picture from like 4 years prior to that in his junior high school graduation or something. Yeah. They don't show snippets of the video where he strong-armed the bodega guy.
Yeah, just minutes before.
Right, which caused Officer Darren Wilson to be looking and find it suspicious that he was holding a box of cigarillos or whatever that were exactly like what was just reported in the theft.
That's right.
So you take that compared to a female, unarmed, trying to get help for somebody being shot in the stomach. She got a fraction of the media coverage. And you would think, and actually the reason she got so much that she did was she was a dual citizen, being half Australian and American. Okay. So the Australian Prime Minister voiced in on that, like, what's going on, that this woman was killed. But she still only got maybe a tenth of what Michael Brown's coverage was. So with the shooting of Michael Brown, his cohort in the strong arm robbery, he said that Michael Brown was innocent. He was running away from the cop. So it was breaking.
And that was the witness.
That was the witness, yes. So it was breaking news when Fox News reported they had a eyewitness and a YouTube video backing up Officer Wilson's story. But the next day, the 5 media networks ran 95 stories on the Michael Brown shooting, and not one of them had the headline that there was a key witness supporting the officer's testimony.
So it's deceitful, and they're, again, pushing the false narrative, the myth.
Yes. In fact, they still had headlines talking about the Michael Brown's cohort and his story, and somebody else, another witness, supporting that.
So then, I go back to why do they do this? Why do they intentionally push these false narratives? That's what I want you as the consumer of this, after you read the book and you listen and watch this podcast. You got to ask yourself, what's the end game of the media? Why are they doing this? And they've been not just doing it for a few years from 2015 to 2018.
No.
We're going back decades.
Right.
And then you look at the end result of all these false narratives. What has that done to the community who don't want to really delve into the nuances of these stories to get the real picture? They're just looking at the attention-grabbing titles of articles and then not really understanding what is truly going on.
Right.
And so now you've got Darren Wilson, fighting for his life, not just physically, he had to fend for himself, but then administratively, and then his family
he was
inundated in front of his house. So he could never be a police officer ever again with that name.
No, he had to move.
He had to move.
He moved states.
But ultimately, at the end of the day, Department of Justice came in, the Ferguson Police Department,
Right.
and overhauled, looked at everything. But then did Eric Holder ruled in their investigation that he was in the course and scope of his duties.
Yes, Officer Darren Wilson was totally cleared.
Vindicated.
He was vindicated, but so that they can say there was something wrong in Ferguson, they went after the department and said that there was a systemic racism problem there, that they were pulling over, harassing young black men, jaywalking, just like Michael Brown was doing.
Yep. So that gave them cover to keep pushing the narrative and keep driving to try to force activist change.
Yes.
Under a false narrative.
Yes. And so they can keep on talking about Ferguson.
Yep. And then now look what's happened to Ferguson, and look what's happened to Darren Wilson and all this. And then here we go. This narrative continues. So we've had a few more case studies. Michael Brown, I think, was one of your most compelling ones, but you've got a few more that I think move the needle in your comparisons. But then you actually get into how these false narratives pushed by the media, and you gave excellent statistics that back up your case study.
Thanks.
But then you get into how the false narratives not just impacts communities' trust of policing, but then more importantly, it impacts police officers' inability to make decisions.
As I was telling you, in the book, one of the officers that died in 2019 was police officer Kyle Olinger from Montgomery County. Died on 10 April 2019. But he was shot back in August of 2003. So 2003, that predates the whole Michael Brown Ferguson effect.
21 years ago.
21 years ago, he was suffering with the wounds. And what it was, he was on a car stop, approaches the passenger side. There's a subject in the passenger side. He sees the gun at his feet, but it's a black passenger. And he said, his quote was, his fear of shooting a young black male and igniting tensions may have played a role in his decision not to use force. So when that subject then went for the gun against his orders not to move, he hesitated, and he ended up paying for it by getting shot and ultimately dying from those injuries. So he was worried about the ramifications of shooting a black person.
In 2003.
Yes. And I'll tell you, as a union leader, been one for, I think I'm going on 12 years now. When I get a call that one of our officers was involved in a deadly police shooting, after making sure the officers are okay, the next question, the biggest concern is, what was the race?
What's the race of the suspect?
Because I know if it was a white subject that was shot, even if by some crazy chance the officer did something wrong, they're not going to be crucified for it. It'll be seen as just an honest mistake. But if the person's black, even if they did everything right, there's a potential that's going to ignite a fire, protest, and all kinds of ramifications.
Yeah, that's a base takeaway you have. I love the fact that you used and you paid homage to the officers who have passed in the line of duty based upon a lot of these false narratives, and you break down their incidents. You've got pictures of them. I mean, I can't express enough praise on the detail, the level of detail in this book, and how it really backs up your hard work to get down to the statistical data points. But you've got some other examples that I think are profound that you want to at least tell the audience about.
Thank you. Yeah, because I like to throw a name out there that, like, everybody's heard of Breonna Taylor in that shooting. I just talked about it a little bit. But a very similar name, Breanne Leath, the 8th. Ever heard of her? No, neither had I until I was doing my research. She was an Indianapolis Metropolitan Police officer, also a young black female. She was actually murdered. But because she was a police officer, you never heard about it. She responded to a disturbance call. A woman reported her boyfriend was acting all crazy. She knocks on the door, and the guy shot through the door with his Kel-Tec and killed her. She never even saw face to face.
Just shot.
Just shot, dead. The other officers took her limp body away. They set a cordon up, surrounded the house, and eventually talked the murderer, a black male, out peacefully without firing a single shot back.
So they de-escalated it.
They
That's been the
de-escalated.
biggest thing from a lot of these myths is cops need to de-escalate more.
Yeah.
So that's what we saw even in Washington State in 2018 was this movement of de-escalate Washington now,
Right.
which ultimately ended up changing a lot of the state statutes that impacts our ability to do our job.
Because they don't want us to do our job.
Is exactly what this is.
Right.
So let's keep on going with her. So what was that's an example of the de-escalation component where cops didn't have to return fire, although you've got a young, aspiring black female officer
Right.
who was tragically killed in the line of duty, and we heard nothing about her in the media.
Zero. Yeah. And it also betrays the lie that they say how black people, because police will shoot the black person whenever they have a chance. Whenever they can make up an excuse. Well, what greater excuse is there than you just killed one of our officers in the line of duty, but not a single shot was fired back. And I have the statistics later on in the book that detail out of how many times the officers that were killed in the line of duty, where the perpetrator who killed them was not killed in that incident and was captured without being shot. And it shows the race of that. And it shows predominantly black people are not shot by the police, even when they are cop killers.
In a disproportionate manner.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's awesome. Do you have one more example that you could point to that people could find compelling in terms of the discrepancy between what the media is pushing and how it's impacting law enforcement's ability to make the proper calls because of the level of pressure that could be put on them and their families?
I'll give you Biloxi police officer Robert McKeithen. I think he was in his 70s. He was still working because I think he was supporting his child's child, his grandchild. And this one tells a story of how we know every fight is a gunfight because we bring a gun to every call we respond to or everything we do. Well, he was transporting a prisoner for a mental evaluation. The prisoner got the better of him, was able to disarm him.
So physically assaulted him.
Physically assaulted the officer because younger, stronger. I think he was a 19-year-old black male. Took his weapon and executed him with it. Killed him in the line of duty. You never heard of him? Nobody has. There's been no protests, no vigils, no streets named, no visits from the White House, because the White House did send, I think it was 3 representatives. The Obama White House sent to Michael Brown's funeral. Biden. Was it Biden? No, it wasn't Biden. It was still Obama, but Alton Sterling sent 2. There was an American general killed in Afghanistan that didn't get 3 White House dignitaries at his funeral. It just shows you the imbalance.
It's just the imbalance. The optics of it is all that matters.
Yeah.
And the media pushes that with their consistent false narratives.
Yes, they do.
So your book does an amazing job of breaking down the myths. When we talk about these myths and the impacts on just the profession, but I think mostly with what's coming up in the election season right now, we're starting to see the signs of tension. Because just like 2020, when we had the George Floyd riots, that was an election season as well.
Right.
What are your thoughts on how this election, based upon the statistics you have that you've laid out, the media narratives, how is it going to impact public safety? Because a lot of what you described really highlights, in my view, why public safety, the policing profession, is in the current predicament. We can't get enough people to want to see this as a long-term profession because of the media scrutiny. Mm-hmm. It's administratively hazardous. We could eventually find ourselves in jail. We could potentially lose our homes, lose our livelihood, and ultimately lose our families. And in fact, we could possibly lose our lives based upon these false narratives. And I'm not saying that police officers, we all make the right decisions, but there are a certain amount of people in our profession that are bad apples, but that's very few and far between. The majority of us want to do the right thing and defend the Constitution and protect the public. But what I've seen the course of my career is the continuation of these false narratives that perpetuate the problem we have. And I know in Seattle, we've lost 700 cops in 4 years, post-defunding movement. And we're scrambling to try to get enough officers to even answer basic 911 calls. Are you experiencing that in New York as well?
Yes. Suffolk County is kind of known as the promised land, the best place to go to in at least the Northeast, to be a police officer.
Yeah.
They still like the police, and we have great contracts, so it's a great place to be a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, officers are leaving departments in the area to come to Suffolk County.
Sure, better wage, better quality of life.
Definitely. When I took the test in the late 90s, we had 41,000 applicants. As recently as 2011, we had 31,000 applicants. This past year, 2023, we had 13,000 applicants.
So it's dropped a third almost every decade, if you will.
It's like 67% drop.
So that just goes to show you the power of media, the consistent pushing of false narratives, how it can really derail everybody's public safety.
Right. And think about it. If you're somebody who really wants to get into police work, to do the right thing, to go after bad guys, to protect the good guys, well, you have to see what's going on and how officers are being indicted. That when you read the story, you're like, well, they didn't do anything wrong. They were doing their job. They reasonably believed their life was in danger. You see that and you're like, well, why am I going to do that when I could do something else that'll pay me the same or better, that I'm not going to have to work nights and weekends, where my name's not going to be dragged through the mud, even if I do everything right. It's like in New York City, they voted to get rid of qualified immunity for the officers so they wouldn't be protected. It's so hard to get people to be police officers in New York that and actually around the country, because I think in Detroit, they got rid of the physical fitness standards. Other departments are getting rid of standards as far as if you had misdemeanors, mental health issues, drug issues.
So we're lessening the standard of becoming a police officer, where previous applicants would be disqualified and not accepted. But now we're so desperate to get a human in a uniform to answer a call that those standards are being eroded significantly. So then we would be playing into the activist talking points of being bad people and bad apples that push an agenda based upon false narratives and racial injustice. Right?
Well, I mean, not even racial. You're just going to have people that should have never been police officers.
100% agree with you.
So there's going to be more issues in the future than we've had in the past, because we've had a very professional police force the past decades, I would say. I mean, I got on in 2000. I'd say a good 10, 20 years before that, things had changed. It is a true profession. Intelligent, educated people doing the right thing. Like I was saying, it's not a Middle East Border Patrol officer who throws somebody $50,000
and gets paid off,
and eventually recoups $200,000 every year at the border.
So the cost of a lot of this and a lot of the movement post a lot of these major incidences that are consistently slammed by the media for the public to consume, all based on a false narrative, is that it impacts states' laws in terms of the policing to being able to do our jobs.
Right.
But then it also impacts department policies, where the policies, I know of in Seattle, the policies are so strict that it's literally, we've policied ourselves out of being an effective and reasonable police force. It's incredible how administratively overloaded the police officers are. So you made a comment earlier before we got underway here, is that police officers are so inundated with the new tech, the cameras, the accountability measures, that it is removing our ability to be able to effectively do our jobs of adhering to our oath of office and protecting the public.
Yes.
I mean, just that administrative overhaul is stunning.
Well, what's our greatest tool as police officers out on the street? Your eyes for observation, to see somebody committing, criminality is afoot. Well, if your head is buried in your mobile data center, filling out paperwork to link your latest body camera video from the traffic stop that you could have been done within 5 seconds because you saw just a regular working citizen, you're going to send them on their way with a warning. But because of fear of lawsuits and new department regulations, you have to document everything. You have to do a traffic stop data sheet on that as well. So you're losing a lot of time for, as you said, paperwork, when you could actually be doing police work that would help keep your community safe.
So this is the repercussions of these knee-jerk reactions to media's false spins.
Yes.
And it's fallen on police unions and associations to be the mouthpieces of the officers. But, we don't have the funding, but they want to try to remove the rights of police officers in terms of the unions. They want to silence us.
Right.
I think it's podcasts like this and your books. Your book is, like as I mentioned, moves the needle and gives people some hope and guidance. But, with people that consumed your book, the knowledge that's contained in it, is this enough information to give people hope that public safety can do a turnaround? Because we use in UCOPS the mantra of it's time for public safety to make a comeback. How do we get there? How do we get back to reason? How do we at least influence media to stop pushing these narratives against police and undermining public safety? Does your book get us there?
My book is the tool that can be used to get there, to go after the media, to counteract their stories. Anytime a media person puts out a false narrative, you can reference this book, and I'm sure you'll be able to tear apart the article that they're writing because it's going to be based on lies. So this could be the reference for all those kind of incidents. But we need also to hold politicians accountable. And that's not happening because, like in New York City, only 20% of the people actually vote in the mayoral election.
That's a meager amount.
Right. So when that person gets the majority, say 55% of 20%, it's a fraction of the populace is actually voting for people like de Blasio, who was horrible for law enforcement and public safety.
True activist.
True activist. Yes, he was. And so what we saw in Suffolk is New York City being so populous, they have so many politicians to represent their people that it overwhelms the state. So New York City actually reached out to us and asked for help in a primary against somebody who had been anti-police. And so in one day, we got 19 volunteers, and this is what you need. You need boots on the ground, knocking on the doors, and put such a scare into that politician that he had to spend money, had to call in favors.
So at the end of the day, armed with the knowledge that's laid out in your book, it's fantastic. It's going to be on the consumer. It's on you. I mean, police officers, we can only do so much, and we're screaming of how bad this is for the profession, and which means it's bad for you. We're trying to do the right thing. We're human beings doing a difficult job. We don't always make the right call, but you've got to get involved. So the call to action is, to your point, vote, support public safety measures that are reasonable.
Right.
And if you're paying attention and you know the knowledge that's laid out in this book, you're going to see the media for what it is, that they're pushing an agenda. And my view is it's politically generated to push a narrative, and it generates money, clicks, and it's all based on a false plateau.
Right.
And I'm an internal optimist. When I read your book, it gave me some more vigor in my step to have the confidence. And as you laid out in page 2, I love that. It's like, it's up to the people that are going to have to get confident to, at their next family reunion, to push against the person who might be coming across as woke and who targets you for being a cop or laments about the political conversation with everybody's criminal justice reform component.
Right.
That you can arm yourself with this knowledge and stay confident, and then you can maybe convince them. I think I've always challenged people, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if you're talking about voting and how impactful it is, how important it is, you got to get 10 people that you know in your circle to vote.
Right.
And maybe you can use some of the information that's laid out in your book to enact reasonable activism.
Yes.
Is there one thing in your book you wish you would have included? Or do you feel as if there's a part 2 to your book that's coming up? Do you have the time to do this with your busy schedule?
I think I covered it all because that was about 18 months out of my life, and I got as deep into it as I could. But what I do need to do is spread it more throughout the country. And I'm hoping in the future I can spend more time to educate other departments and groups, maybe certain political groups. I've actually reached out to the people on the left, the anti-police crowd, to present this with them because...
And what did they say?
They want nothing to do with it.
Why do you think that's the case?
Because it shows what a lie they're pushing. And that's how, like, we had one activist who tried to come across as moderate and he wants to do the right thing and help the community. So I gave him a copy of the book. I was like, love to talk to you about it. And a couple of weeks later, he finally got back to me, and his only question was, so you don't think George Floyd was racist or something? It was just something ridiculous. And I was like, all you got out of my book was that question? That's it? It's very disingenuous.
Very disingenuous.
Yeah. I'm thrilled, though. I think every PBA should have what you have right here, this podcast, because we all need a mouthpiece like this.
Yeah.
And I am confident.
Thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure. I think it's great. I'm confident that this book, anybody who gets it, two things will show them. Any racism related to deadly police shootings is being done by the press, the politicians, and the protesters, not the police. So you can rest easy, happy, however you want to say it, that the police are acting honorably and doing their very best to carry out their duties, not use deadly force at all, but when they are forced to, they are doing it just because they fear for their lives or somebody else's. Race, age, sex, nothing superficial has anything to do with it.
That's a fantastic way to push it. Thank you, man, for all you've done. Lastly, in closing, where do we stand with public safety with this election, this election cycle?
Well, if you look at the things the president has said about policing, he's had a few quotes painting us as racist. Biden has. From one time he was asked by a woman, what would you say to your daughter if she was pulled over by the police? And his response was, well, my daughter's white, so she wouldn't be pulled over by the police. Another time he said how he insinuated to blacks that they never know when they're going to be shot just sleeping in their beds or going out for a jog, referencing, I think, Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. And another time he said, we should train our police that when somebody's charging at them, an unarmed person's charging at them with a knife or something, they should shoot them in the leg and not the heart. You think the Secret Service would be trained to do that as well if somebody was charging at the president? That is ridiculous. But he said stupid things like that. And then you see how he treats the border crisis, which is a law enforcement issue, having a secure border, because we have millions of illegal people coming here, committing crimes, bringing fentanyl, raping and killing our women and children. So I think law enforcement, criminal justice, a big referendum on this election. And it's very clear where each side is on it.
Yeah, and I think that's what's led to a lot of the division. So again, all of this is based upon myths. I love the title of your book.
Thank you.
Justified Deadly Force and the Myths of Systemic Racism.
Yeah.
Michael, dude, I can't thank you enough for not only just taking the time to come out here and talk about your book, but 100% of the proceeds of your book go to where?
They will go to families of the fallen. I have a few different foundations or nonprofits that will receive the money. Like Brotherhood for the Fallen is another one. They do great things. They send police officers to the funerals of every line of death officer funeral in the country.
That's fantastic. I mean, again, I just got chills. I barely get chills when I'm interviewing guests, but a few times I've had guests on here, I get that because it's been resounding and compelling to me. Moves the needle, but you dedicated 18 months of your life of service to write this book. To me, that's a continuation of your service, not only to the nation as a military veteran, but the continued service as a police officer. And you continue to do this, and you're taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk about this. It's awesome.
Thank you.
I can't thank you enough, bro.
Thanks. Yeah, I couldn't just live with myself, having served overseas to protect our country, just stay silent as I'm seeing it be destroyed from within. So I tried to do my part, give somebody, give people a tool, a resource. So, I hope they use it. What's
the last thing that you would say to people that are going to watch this that you feel as we haven't touched on yet?
I feel if you're doing the right thing and you're pushing the truth, you're saying the truth, you're going to be attacked. And you just have to be courageous enough to withstand the verbal attacks, because they're going to call you racist and bigots and all kinds of names. But you're not.
And that's happened to you.
Yes, I paid some personal price. I did pay some personal price for
just for writing this book and speaking out.
Yes,
but it shows you got courage because you're willing to continue to serve. And if we don't have the courage to stand up for truth,
right,
then there goes our republic.
Exactly.
Where can people find this book? Where can they find you?
They can find it Amazon, Barnes & Noble's online, and I have a website, jdfinformation.com, that you could link to the book. And I do have some information up there, memes showing facts, things that'll catch your attention.
Yeah. Would you mind doing some signed copies for people that request it? How about this? The first 10 comments on this podcast will get a signed book from Michael, thanking them for taking on the false myths that not just impact the police profession, but ultimately it impacts your quality of life. Because if you lose policing, you're going to lose the republic. You're going to get serious oppression.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
You're a good man.
Thanks,
I
Mike.
appreciate your time.
Thank you as well.
Hey, thanks for watching Hold the Line with Mike Solon. I want to thank Michael Simonelli for taking the time out of his busy duties protecting the public and defending the profession of policing. Get the book. It will move the needle for you. And if you disagree, you give us some feedback, we'll take it as well. Please leave a comment, like and subscribe, and share this podcast. That's all I ask of you. Use the content and consume the book, because without truth, we'll lose our freedom. And it's police officers that are standing in the breach from tyranny. And without the community supporting us, we have a tough road ahead. Thanks for taking the time for Hold the Line.
Awesome.
Cool, dude.
That was great. Thank you.
Good job, man.